episode 57. And I'm talking to Yvonne Daher, who is a change catalyst, who is interested in really addressing deeper problems. Today's assumption is the idea that we should fight for justice. And I think this is such a human response to unfair treatment, to want to right wrongs and fix things, but particularly when they've been done to us as individuals. But so often I see a lot of harm coming from that search for restitution, and not just for everyone involved. It seems to backfire very often. So I'm really interested in exploring this one, and I think it's going to be a really, really good, quite a deep one as we get back from the summer break. So I'm really hoping it's going to be as interesting for you as I hope it will be for me. So if you happen to be new to Delightful Dissent, it's a shared exploration of ideas that we often seem to take for granted. It came up through my work with people who are taking pioneering approaches to deep and complex problems, and Yvonne is very much one of those people. I found that in this work, we often hit these kind of hidden barriers of these implicit beliefs and these deeper assumptions. And this is a show about challenging some of those, bringing them to the light, seeing where they work and where they don't work. So I hope this will give you some specific ideas about things that can help you in your personal and professional life. But perhaps more importantly, I hope it will give you some ideas about how you can go out there and challenge assumptions yourself, because I'd like to see this something that everyone can do and is a regular part of everyone's kind of daily life. The show is called Delightful Dissent because, we are going to think about things differently. We might disagree with the prevailing wisdom. We might disagree with each other. But it's about being playful. It's not about proving ourselves right at the expense of everyone else. It's about exploring and seeing what new opportunities lie in between and in different ways of thinking about and approaching things. The show is genuinely live, so please do bear with us if there are any
can I add
difficulties.
something,
Sorry.
Matthew?
Yes, please do.
Just to make justice to the justice topic, also my intention is that people maybe think about situations where they can see harm or violence and bring it closer to the intimate compassion, understanding, whatever it is. And then, whatever, we talk about it later. But I was thinking there's the yes, this is it. And the care, the love, that is the ultimate law. That at the end, the justice is a feeling from our side that something wrong is being done to others who we feel closely to. So we want to make it something that we can think about collectively, because systems are not static. We influence. We are always making choices.
Absolutely, and I think this is going to be a really key part of the show, and I think it's important for people to know that we're likely to touch on some quite difficult topics in this exploration today. So we're going to be talking potentially about violence, including state violence, repression, potentially colonialism and war. So I don't think it's going to be quite as heavy as it sounds, but I do want
Why so
people...
serious?
Exactly. But if you are watching and those are significantly triggering things for you, watching or listening, then please be aware that we may well touch on such topics. It's also possible that we may use strong language. So if that's an issue for you, please also be warned that that's a thing. There aren't any perfect answers here, particularly in this space. This is very much about exploring, asking questions of yourself and of others, including us. So if you're watching live, please do comment and be part of the conversation, and we'll try and bring you in and answer anything that you raise. And if you're watching or listening to the recording, then we'll be sharing information about how you can get in touch with either of us and continue that conversation at the end of the show. So I first met Yvonne through an event at the Happy Startup School, and we kind of got chatting, and we had a conversation. And I was particularly impressed with their really that combination of passion and rigorous thinking at the same time, which is a really special combination, I think, and really how adept Yvonne is at navigating these ambiguous and messy spaces, because I think that's a really vital part of probably what we're going to explore today. But could I ask you, Yvonne, perhaps to introduce yourself a bit, maybe tell us a little bit about what you do and the kind of people that you like to work with, please?
So, in my career, I've been a project manager in the IT field around finance, and I did a nice job there, and I was getting up and so on. And yet, there was something that hit me in the face when I understood that actually the team was not happy with how much we were working and so on. I wasn't seeing it. For me, there was a war, like there is war in some sharky areas. And if we don't have the upper hand, we will lose for the team. It's bad. And it is. However, there's another way of getting where we want to be. So it made me think about who I truly am, which was the girl guide and so on. So I've always said in early stages of when we were in teams that the process and the people involved in the process, whatever it is, much more important than the result. And they are the ones who get the right results when they let go of the wrong results sometimes. So anyway, my life started shifting, and then I started thinking more about what's in my heart. And I had a very failed attempt at leaving the corporate the first time and going into an adventure where I wasn't qualified. We all didn't see it happening correctly, but I think we were immature to end it in a nice way. So I had a hit, and it had to do with economy, which is a subject that I keep going back to in a way or another, and economical justice. And so after 3 years of activism that was happening and major things that happened on the movement, people's movement in Beirut mainly, but also in the region, there was a movement. I participated in Beirut Madinati, which was campaign-led, people-led movement that showed me a lot of miracles happening when we were aligned around an idea, and it was quite flat as an organization and grassroots and so on. And then after the elections, of course, we didn't win, but we got 40% in 3 months of preparation for an election. So it was huge. I got into my own work, inner work, and understanding myself much more and so on. And I worked with change makers in Lebanon. We had a lot of defeats. And I think it was very tiring. I got tired before the crisis started, and I needed to go back to some kind of security and sanity for everything going on. And because I was involved in spaces where domestic workers are like, there's a horrible kafala system in Lebanon. And very sad stories and heartbreaking stories, and also the war in Syria and racism, and also the queer movement and the radical Christian and the radical Muslims. So a lot of that was happening, and I needed to breathe. And I came to Greece for a job. A job came related to my previous experience in running projects around Murex. And that's what I'm doing now. In general, I'm a safe practitioner in the sense of understanding the framework and working with it without the naming, the conventions, and so on. So I do transformations around that, and all goes through relationships. This is what drives me to catalyze as much as I can the relationships and open channels so that we communicate and have enough safe space to talk about the deeper questions when projects go into bad places, for instance, and so on. I try
Mm.
to be guided by this kind of work. And I love
Um,
fun. Also, I lost my dog a week ago, so I'm a little bit. It's our dog, my partner and I, and it's been hard.
mm, yeah, absolutely. And that being able to engage with the full range of everything in this space I think, is so appropriate to the
For the
topic and what we
conversation.
bring as people at any point in in the cycle. And one of the interesting things about this show is because it's live and at a fixed point, we bring a lot more humanness because
Mm.
we are how we are when we show up. And I think that, the allowance of that and the showing that in that is acceptable, that is okay, that you can do good things however just being present, I think is a really important part of this. So thank you for joining us. I'm interested though, what is it, do you think, that really led this aspect of your work, this emerging aspect around justice, to really feel like it was something that you wanted to commit so much to?
Look, I'm gonna be very honest with you. For me, this talk is kind of made me think about how I am committed to something like that and aligning my life around it, even though it can be done anywhere. But it feels like it is what matters. And it really doesn't need to be in war zones. And I really truly hope I'm wrong, but the whole world can be a war zone anytime. It's not a funny thing. And yeah, today I read a post on social media that talks about somebody who is in Europe and has listened to war planes, and he's Syrian, so probably all his no, he's Lebanese. He's Lebanese from the Shuf. Sorry, I confused. Yeah, and I remember this feeling in my body, and I pray that no one hears it. I don't want my enemies to hear it anymore. I want us all to stop hearing warplanes. It's horrible. I'm really happy, Matthew, you don't know it, but you know that in your, you know.
Yeah, I yeah, it's it's not something I've ever directly experienced, but been, even being on the edges of it is a deeply disquieting experience. And I think how we engage with this stuff, there's so many really big, this is absolutely this playful, somehow being playful with something so serious
Mm.
is such a challenging thing. But before we get into it too much, do you have a quote that you would like to
Oh,
share
yes.
with us?
So when you asked me, I told you about Rumi's quote, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field, and I'll meet you there. I've met you there.
Hmm.
I'm meeting you there.
Thank you. And what is it that really, how made you want to share that particular quote with us today?
I've been fascinated with perspectives work and what we call deep democracy. And it's tough when you need to do it for yourself, see yourself from different perspective, etc., etc. And I think that this is maybe the hardest work and the most rewarding for all of us to do, so that we function more as we are intended to function, which is as a team. We understand that what I have here, my shadows, the other one has them also. And it doesn't mean he becomes a demon, because that's the distrust we live in. And that's the no debate place. So we bait, we fight. Debate in French means debate, débattre, not fighting.
Wow.
Battre is fighting.
Yeah, I'd never made that connection before. That's
Yes,
wow. Okay.
we're not talking, right,
Mm,
Matthew? We always talk about this need. There's no in betweens anymore. There's this
mm,
guy's bad, this guy's good on all levels.
mm,
And yet, when we want to talk about something that we feel is very rightful to do, we don't do it because some laws in some countries do not allow it. And this is where courage is more important than the law for justice. This is where we need to use any platform to open the floor for the people who are in jail or the people who are under the bombs in Gaza and so on and so forth, in Iraq, in Lebanon, absolutely, in Syria, where everybody's opening embassies with somebody who killed a whole, not himself, by himself. And we can also, this is where ultimately, there's no us versus them. But we cannot, because we understand the guy down the road, we cannot not say he's a criminal.
mm,
And people are putting hands with him because of a geopolitical
mm,
reasoning happening. And if they don't put their hands and they go into conflict, more warplanes from everybody.
mm,
In Syria, NATO planes were going.
mm.
There's no one people who didn't bomb the Syrians in a way or another, in an alignment or another.
It's which is such a when you state it that plainly, it's so shockingly true. That idea that we can't escape this interconnectedness. This idea of wrong and right is
I
an
mean,
impossible
it's
split to
important for
maintain.
rigorousness that you said,
Mm.
you know.
And so the idea of of a and I think for me though there's a very interesting tension there, but there is clearly something in this where some people are doing more harm and others are doing good, and without blame there is something interesting in there about how we move towards um, things that are more positive and are more generative, and how we support that. Because I think this is it's it the kind of when we move beyond this idea of just splitting and separating everything out into entirely good and entirely bad, it feels like there's a potential, or perhaps it's often leveled at people who are seeking to do this, that therefore everything becomes it's equivalent, and everything loses any sense of meaning and kind of relative evaluation. So is that something you could how does that relate to this idea of justice?
I don't think they are so much opposites. And I think in societies, we got to conversations like that. I mean, I am French as well, and I like Taubira. And when she was in the Justice Department, she was, it's just, what do we do with the criminals? We need to catch them, between brackets. We need to learn our lessons together, collectively. It's how we learn them. And what makes us learn them that matters for me is how we're doing it. And I don't think the process of human evolution with all of its intelligence will not get soon to a place where we are all going, our feelings are taking us. Everybody who works in activism becomes trained, and they are being taken to a place of deeper listening to how we can fight for love, and in a way that is Haida. And I'm not here to teach anyone. I don't know how to do it. I'm struggling. It's a messy process for me, and I'm struggling, and I'm doing my best, and I'm exhausted. That's why also I want to be with you, Matthew. I want to talk. I don't know
Mm,
if, because I believe that in the collective, I believe that there's something between the south hemisphere and the north hemisphere that needs to happen so that justice
mm,
happens. Justice is not out of reach in general. If we talk about Tobira and what she done back then, she was just debating, how do we work in prisons with the people who were, I don't know, you can imagine that it is always marginalized people who get to places, or dissidents, in a very subtle way. Speaking about French justice as well, there are some detainees that are against the law that are detained. We don't know why they're detained, but they're detained.
mm,
So also the same justice system that I gave as an example is not where it needs to be,
mm,
and can go further. But I cannot, we cannot just like keep on talking between us. We need to onboard people and thinking that this is caring for somebody. That's it. If you can change the law there for us, help us. When you're
mm,
electing somebody, think about what they think about how they deal with us. Do they
mm,
wait for something to explode so that they do constructions and they move the green problems to Egypt or to whatever? And then Ala Abdel Fattah and his others are detained? This is questions that you can help us with if you think with us. And maybe we will be much more smiling and funny because we're very funny people and we love life. And that's why we're doing that.
I think that idea in it, that it can get very kind of excessively serious almost, and get stuck in that.
Overwhelming,
Mm,
overwhelming, actually.
yeah, is a real challenge to this. And I think there is perhaps, I think this idea of fighting for justice, for me, the idea of the metaphor of a fight is such a unhelpful one,
True.
actually, is I'm not sure justice can really arrive through a fight in any sense. It's much more, there's a kind of dance to this, a mutuality that's not present in the idea of a fight. Um,
Where fight
um,
is not present as well.
Sorry.
Where fight is not present, tensions are present, and we can
Mm,
create from that. And we have to do the talk. We talk. We need to talk, tell stories from different perspective, and we need to empathize with each other. And we don't need to make it so serious,
mm,
actually. On the contrary, when a hand is, crosses these lines, and we were talking about it, the us and them, you Westerners, you need to repay us, and if you don't do it either, and the guy is stuck in a life that turns like a, and has a family, or it's not helpful, not
mm,
for the person, not for us. I think the major indicator is opening the heart. This is the best service for justice, caring for love. When there's a fight, if we can be bridges, and we don't need to do it on despite our anger, because that's the opposite of what we need to do. We need to really listen to our anger. I'm trying to do it. It's tough work, and I still get super angry with a lot of what's happening and with how much unseen it goes, and our responsibility as change makers in that. So, the double blame that Tara talks about, where there's wrongdoing, then there's the mind gives us another thing until we heal it. We have to relive the wrongdoing, the failure, the whatever it is. And this
mm.
is injustice for us. And the exit is always forgiveness. So more love, actually, and growth from that place. That's my experience so far.
I think it's a really challenging thing, to be with the emotions that are such strong emotions. And I often talk on this show about the importance and the value of emotions, and that how do we channel something, the anger that can arise in skillfully in positive ways, because I think it's an appropriate response to to having violence done to you, to be angry. That's not an inappropriate emotion to feel, but how do you then work with that in a positive way rather than allowing it to do you more harm as well? Because I think this is the other part of this, is this idea of, very often these ideas or that are associated with justice seem to do an awful lot of harm to everyone involved, which to me doesn't really fit with the model. It's like, okay, well, you've had this awful thing has happened. Um, this person was involved, and so we collectively do harm to everyone as a response, and that doesn't feel like a it, it feels very much like this idea of like we're doing more harm over here, but we're doing everyone harm, and that doesn't feel like it moves anyone in the direction I actually want to be going or want to see happening.
And maybe somebody from the other side actually also are serving for the same kind of intention, and they get it from their own perspective. It looks totally different. And this is where I'm saying we meet you there,
Mm,
is the assumption that I can have my real allies on the road, but I don't need to make everybody else an enemy. And when I have an enemy, it's an enemy because injustice has been made. Let's talk about it. I'm an American. I'm a journalist. I get shot. All investigations show that I've been shot by the Israeli army, or I don't know how to call it, like the system,
mm,
whatever. They decided to kill her intentionally. And
mm,
she's American. She's Palestinian as well. No investigation. Biden goes to Israel, shows all support to Zionism and to Israel and so on. And he's free to do that as long as he exercises his own duty as an American president to pay, to see what's going to happen with this family, and to to ask themselves questions. America has vetoed every resolution that's against Israel from Earth. This is the system that came out of the last war from the last century. And this is
Mm,
where we need to heal as people. And
mm,
healing is not about bashing and burning the people who made us harm, like others have done, but also not recuperating a trauma from that other people have caused and creating, uprooting a whole people in a so-called empty land. Who said it
mm.
was empty? It has never been empty. And having something that breaks the flow of this region has caused a lot to the region. And I think we need to talk about it.
Mm. Absolutely. I think raising all of these, and I think it's one of the big challenges with this whole talking about justice is to think about, when we choose a frame that excludes everything that led up to that.
Mm,
And it's this very difficult situation with somewhere like Israel, created out of one of the most horrific incidents in history to me, that then generates a state that is doing its own harm. And I don't like to compare harms. This isn't. I'm not seeking to compare harms here, but just saying it is doing its own harm. And that again isn't actually necessarily serving the people involved on either side. That feels like this. There's and again in the US and in its relationship is that there's it's also terribly tangled, and the pulling apart seems to just tighten the knots and increase you getting stuck in this ongoing cycle. And I think for me, this idea of fighting for justice very often has this entrenching quality. It's like, okay, we want this. This wrong was done to us, and therefore we must have this retribution. And how that process plays out seems to increase every time if it's not addressed. And I
it's not
think,
resolved, yes. It's big injustice in the whole 20 this century has lived. I mean, I happen to have been born there. You could have been born here and seen the same
mm,
thing. I've
mm,
seen this injustice from the moment I was born. I mean, not to exaggerate, but I'm Arabic. I will say stuff like that. No, but I'm saying, I mean, I've lived all of my life seeing the injustice done to the Palestinian people.
mm,
Oh, and lately, of course, I've seen the injustice we've done to the Palestinian people in Lebanon.
mm,
And I hope one day we will find a way to honor the dead, to honor and to shift laws that are right now against them being able to work in some work. And of course, Lebanese people will stand on that side because it's a failed economical system.
mm,
Had we had a good economy, we need people to work. We would have created jobs for us and others. And yes, maybe at one point in time, we need to talk about this stuff, but we're not doing it, and we're not doing it. If we don't do it, but we're taking care of ourselves, it will automatically be done because it's just a manifestation of our intention. Intention
mm,
is very powerful. So even if we have shadows, even if we have hurt each other and ourselves and so on, if we keep nurturing the intention that we have, I feel that it's a good enough driver. But it can be a driver that challenges the mind a lot and us knowing where we're going and so on.
mm. I think that the intention and holding that in the face of our imperfection,
Mm.
our own ability to engage and carry that out is such a well, it's not something we're encouraged to do systemically very often. And I think this relationship between us as individuals and the systems around us and the relationships around us is absolutely key to this idea of justice and fighting for justice, or how we bring about a more just situation.
Or
Because
level, yeah,
I'd really like to talk about that personal relationship with
yeah.
this situation and with the systems around us. And I think a lot of how we internalize what we have experienced and how we understand the stories we tell, the way we understand the sense we make of those experiences, seems to be a big player in our capacity, one way or the other, to bring about a more just system or not.
Yeah, I think here I want to take it back to the first point that we started with, which is not taking ourselves so seriously. So why so serious, you know? Laughing. Laughing more, because if I want to judge life or myself or anyone involved in the story of my puppy dying it, a week ago, it was really painful. I wasn't expecting it. I never had this kind of relationship. But anyway, uh, yeah, there was a learning, a big learning about life, about how we understand life and the fact that injustice exists on this material plane for now. And there's a lot of wisdom in us understanding what is our role, and it's an exploration. I don't think it's something that we can find. But what helped me is that whatever I'm doing, whatever is happening in the doing field, there's a lot of mistakes. And the moment I understand this and I find a way to bring in the mistake, it helps me grow. If, and then that other thing that I can always anchor myself in, which is, yes, life is fleeting. We're playing a role called Yvonne Daher. You're playing a role called Matthew Berlinger, which is also why we work for justice. We work for
Mm.
love. We work for the bigger we, I call it.
Mm.
We work for that, and it brings us joy, especially when it works. And my hope is that we find this place where the spark happens, where we have found more freedom for us from every straitjacket posed by any system. And we can keep helping in the meantime.
Mm.
There's a
Yeah,
different measure for stuff then.
absolutely. And for me, on some degree, the need to measure stuff by in very concrete ways can often lead to the kind of problems that we're talking about. The sitting outside of this. A lot of this is felt, is qualitative, is before measurement.
And maybe
And
isn't measurement in a different realm that we still don't
mm,
understand, just to keep the science in us going, because curiosity is and science is really nice.
it's not to say it can't ever be measured.
I
That
I totally
it
agree. We need to let go of the measurement to experience the fullness.
the need to measure before it happens, I think, is
Coding
before
with
we've
that.
experienced it and understood, is often and that comes out of fear and that need for security. I think,
Absolutely.
the need, the guarantees, and that idea of it not being guaranteed again is a really, really difficult thing. And when we're talking about justice, and very often that then turns into conversations about security and safety, either on when we're talking about on an individual level, when we're talking about the kind of criminal justice systems, or when we're talking about on a geopolitical and national and international level. And many of the greatest injustices are committed in the name of security. And that need to trade one group's security for another group's
Yeah.
security, instead of this orientation of, okay, how can we build a more collective, how can we make the overall system more secure? And I think for me that shift from this idea of trading individual things to, okay, what's the overall system, what's available to and in our collective context, is a much more helpful way of thinking about what we're doing when we're trying to bring about a more just world.
It's a big question, and I will land where you are. It's just I think that I want to bring a nuance that says that we cannot deny that we're living today in a world where powerful have planes that kill, and that whatever passion and righteousness and love for the other, um, if plane comes, it's more powerful and it will kill and it will harm massively. We haven't seen, I mean, yes, we have seen the Ukraine war in Europe, and we have related. I mean, this is war. It's not a joke. It's something that, and if we're living in that, although I do not carry weapons, I do not like it, but that's me. If these are the games, the law of the game, this is the play game that people are working with. Don't expect this energy of frustration and injustice to go elsewhere.
Mm,
And if we're playing with arms, I need to think about which side I am, where is the power, what has been happening. We really need to think. And if we
mm,
don't, it's okay. That's our process to evolve as well. I wish for people to look inside, because the inside doesn't change whatever happens and can give us sometimes powerful answers that are beyond the scientific view, without letting go of the rigor of the scientific view if we have the capacity.
mm, mm. I think that that idea that we can apply rigor to this other space, to this more uncertain, qualitative, felt space, is is a really helpful one, and to allow ourselves to do that, develop that as a capacity, is a huge part of this. And I think when it feels like when we talk about justice, it's associated with ideas of judgment,
Mm.
and
I'm better
and for
than you.
me, moving into a space of something that's more like discernment,
Yes,
it's like
discernment,
being that
just
feels
this
like
word.
what we're doing, and but that it's quite an empowering thing actually. The difficulty is, any individual doesn't necessarily, that there are only a handful of individuals who have this kind of direct control over a lot of these situations. So it can feel incredibly disempowering when we are the subject, or we see others the subject of this kind of this misuse of power, to as to what we can actually do about it and engage with. And I'd really like to explore with you a bit how we can recover that aspect of our power, because this is personally relevant to me as well. The marginalization, there are marginalized aspects of my identity, particularly around neurodiversity, and gender,
Mm.
and those are I am, I might look incredibly privileged, and I am incredibly privileged in many aspects,
Same
but I
here,
also
and same field.
experience, and how we work with that combination in this situation is a really tricky one, because it feels like if we're completely excluded, or fully marginalized, we don't have any power, so we can't do anything about it. So the only people who are going to be in a position to really create change are going to have this tangled complicity and intersectional privilege. So what can we do where we do have some ability to change things, and what can that look like?
I think, as I said earlier, in being an activist, working with emotions, etc., it's a ride that some people take, and I'm very privileged in this ride, in the queer ride, and so on. And you too, as you say. So the way I found something to work with, because I'm not the owner on most of it. I mean, I'm privileged. It had taken me a long time to acknowledge it, but here I am. I'm privileged, and I'm less privileged than a lot of other people. How do we bridge this gap so that people who are privileged in a way, or who have rank, we call it in healing histories, that is Lana's course. It's a very important course for healing collectives and people and histories. Otherwise, we keep repeating the cycles of the oppressed, like the oppressor, the oppressed, and the rescuer, and so on and so forth. So we have to heal. This is and that's for me, whatever the topic that people are struggling with, healing, being more coherent, etc., will result in the same thing in us humans helping each other more. I don't know how, but I can give practical ways, and I can give practical ways because this is the humility of doing this kind of work. Is that I used to think I'm going to change the world. Now, no, I'm very humble about it. To be honest with you, if I'm able to help people fundraise 1,000, I'm very happy. If I don't, I'm happy as well. There's a small project that I worked on in Lebanon. If we have the energy for it and it's for it to be kicked off, great. Otherwise, it's okay, and so on and so forth. And this is not a defeat. This is for me the minimum we can do, but we do it, and we can do it. There's a petition in my WhatsApp groups that's still unread because I haven't seen two things actually I can talk about. There's a project of economical work, a creation of jobs, and making people ready for the market of the job. That is very, very, very modest. The salaries are really nothing. They are divided by 8 in dollar equivalent. So anyway, so this is a project that creates work in the poorest city in the world, made by a person who was doing development work and humanitarian and has been in so many places where refugees have been and so on in so many countries. So she knows also what works, what doesn't, and she's been building, creating jobs and communities. And this is Tripoli. It's like a pulley for Tripoli. Tripoli is the name of the city. So you guys can help by donating to Tripoli. They're doing a rally paper as well. You could discover the Tripoli from their eyes, and they bring joy. This is for me, for instance, what brings joy. You know, things happening on the ground in the field, involving ourselves in something like that, and seeing people experimenting with a new way of building an economy from scratch, which is, if humans look correctly, they wouldn't be putting borders on their lands. They would be opening borders so that we build the economy of the future where more migration will come. 2050, it's expected that the whole Africa has to migrate somewhere and it will come to Europe. So instead of using this period of time where we have human potential that need to be bootstrapped for them to create and to participate in the building, we are telling them, go back to your oppressor. That's how we deal with it. Because we are dissociated, we're disconnected because of the overwhelm. Let's stop it with the overwhelm. Let's do our best, little tiny thing per day. Another thing that we could do, you guys, I have this petition, it's for migrant domestic worker. I need to find the time to do it. It takes sometimes this much, and it's done. That's it. You help. This helps. People have been out of prison from the CC because people in France mobilized around his wife. Solidarity helps. It doesn't need to be solved for the whole population in the world, but it needs this kind of engagement helps a lot. There's a petition that people can send to their MPs to make Alaa's voice heard. He's a British citizen, he's in prison. And yesterday, his sister, who was also in prison because only of the way she thinks, was in prison and was objecting the way he was treated and how they were not letting them visit him. He has done nothing. He has just thought and wrote his sentences. That's why he's in prison. You guys, these are the totalitarian regimes that we can have here because of security, exactly as you said,
Mm.
Matthew. That's the string. We need to figure out another way of doing it. Otherwise, we will repeat. We don't need to make it complicated. Signing a petition helps. That's it. I don't know what else to say. Then people will find, and there is injustice everywhere. We don't need to go to the to the Middle East to see the injustices. Although, count the number of times you've watched Middle East, listen to Middle East on the news, and you'll know how much attention should be given for this, what's happening, so that we understand and we heal as a
Mm.
collective, because we are one human family. If we don't see the harm we've caused to each other unintentionally, we cannot we will not heal our divide. And it's okay, we can heal our divide and go live in the mountain and create a new community. That's also fine, whatever, however it shows up, because it needs a spark. And it's a spark that doesn't listen to, that doesn't try to copy others. It's a spark that speaks truth whenever they see it. Harm is harmful. Can't
Mm.
say more. And
Yeah.
I'm responsible for harming lots of people. This is where forgiveness comes and understanding. So what's the lesson?
This is one of the really challenging parts, I think. Accepting that just by existing in our privileged position, we're part of a system that has done a lot of harm to other people, and I say that knowingly as a British citizen, which is being part of a history that's done a huge amount of
All
harm.
Australia pays the salute. All parliamentaries in Australia pay the salute to the Queen.
And I think
2022, Australia.
and the harm done to the people that were in Australia before we decided to call it Australia,
Here you go.
and
So
the
many
harm
stories I don't
done,
know really.
and so many of these, and yet, there's accepting, and I think there's this relationship, and perhaps with this idea of justice rather than this idea of blame, is to think about responsibility in the sense of the ability to respond.
Yes,
Is what
yes,
what is within our ability to change here, the accepting the imperfection,
yeah,
and the accepting, okay, what are our degrees of freedom? And I think for me, another part of this, actually, and a really important part of this, is where we see people who are the subject of injustice, is not to think of those people as necessarily these kind of pitiable victims, but to
absolutely.
support them in doing what they do, and they're expressing their own value. And I think and a big part of this for me personally, is how I do that myself, and in my own world, where I have internalized the prejudice against the way that I am, I still carry that. And a lot of the work, the inner work, is actually unpicking the injustices I'm doing to myself, because because it's connected, because I'm helping others by doing that, and allowing myself to focus on that to some degree. And I think for me, that's we can get drawn into worrying about stuff that's not within our ability to respond, that's beyond that, and then not tackle the stuff that we can right in front of us. And I think for me, that relationship is like, where do I have a degree of freedom? Where do I have some power to change things for myself and for other people? Is a really, really big and important question to explore.
Totally agreed. And I think this is where the third part comes in that I also have my journey with is the savior. So it's the real deal with the pride, with the identity, with the paradoxes inside. That's the work to. Yesterday I was telling Charlie that there's a door. I mean, it's right here, and I need to cross it. This place where you can hold the paradox. Also because you're not feeling insecure in a way, or you're feeling vulnerable. But you know that, I know that death is just another life. So, and I don't want to be, I'm a super normal person. This is the dealing with the savior. And one of my friends brought it to me lately. I salute her. She has been a very good friend from a long time, and we've learned a lot together. Nicole. So this is for me where the real deal, so that with our rank, we don't think we're better than, and that's a big one when we think we're righteous, like and rigorous and blah blah.
Mm.
And all these places have their place. And yet, the real transformation for justice that we are going through, we're in the scratching the surface, I think, is us moving from a fixed identity to an unfolding being, an unfolding truth. Instead of having a history, we have an unfolding future that is emerging, and we are part of it. This is where we humans understand that the matrix of us, this body that some spiritual teacher talked about, is real, like the trees are connected down. It's real. Ecosystems are everywhere. So we are the system, we are the ecosystem, and holding the mirror to the system without detaching ourselves from it, instead of saying the corporate is like this and I can't deal with them, me being in the corporate and seeing a lot of what I can produce as harm has been eye opening for me.
Mm.
And it has been something that made me sit with my integrity, the justice, because whatever I'm doing, whatever harm I'm doing it to myself. There's no other ultimately. That's where we are in the process of learning that we're not only humans, also animals, also trees, also the unseen, something that's working, which is the law of love, sculpting us through this evolution that's hard and painful and that we are exhausted from, but it's working even in our exhaustion. The intention sometimes itself is more than enough, I feel. And
Mm.
yes, aligning with mistakes, owning mistakes and being okay with that as part of the growth mindset, not of a fixed mindset that measures whatever it's measuring. Sometimes letting go of measures, sometimes I've reconciled myself with measures again. I really like them.
They're helpful.
They're helpful. We waste a lot of energy when we talk a lot about IT, you and me, like when we don't automate. We, it pays a lot on the well-being of people, but it's also respecting and detaching ourselves from that I know it place and letting the team evolve towards whatever it is. They might create a better solution.
Yeah. I think this idea of tools, technology,
Mm.
is key
Decision
to a lot.
making.
Mm. And yeah, how we use
Yeah,
those tools. And I include, I mean, weapons are a difficult one because um,
technology.
but they are a technology. There is a bunch of technology in there, and a bunch of technology that can be used in really life-giving, helpful ways as well. This is one of the big, one of the big challenges, and in some ways the big loss associated with a lot of this stuff is actually there's a huge amount of thought, care, and value that when it's turned towards this kind of harm, towards violence, doesn't just isn't then therefore not available for more life-giving approaches. And I think
First one is a word, is our word. It's the most powerful weapon.
mm,
The word. No?
I think I again I think there's a systems for me. It's this
Yeah,
cyclic focus.
nice.
It
Bring
has
me
to
back to the
be
pattern.
it has to be the pattern, and it's a vital part of the pattern.
I
And
agree.
perhaps it is the part of the pattern where we have where we might have the degrees of freedom, where we might have the ability to respond, to divert in different ways. Because
Creative.
that for me is the trick, is where can we do it? How soon can we do it? Where can we divert towards something that is more desirable, more just, more loving for ourselves and for others? And I think for me, there's something deeply personal in this around the idea of how we help others and where we invite others to a mutual meeting of need. Because I think a lot of the discourse around the kind of excluded and the marginalized is essentially that those people have no value to us, whatever us means in this context. that they are therefore a problem to be minimized and managed, rather than an opportunity for a genuine interdependent relationship. And I think those, seeing the value, finding the joy, the mutual joy in those relationships is which means being vulnerable and opening up about
Absolutely.
where our needs aren't met too.
Yeah.
And that conversation about, okay, we both have unmet needs. Where can we find that intersection? Where can we find that overlap? Instead of assuming one party is fully responsible, or or to blame for not meeting those needs.
I think that this is a question that needs to happen with the people involved in each subject.
Mm.
It's not a general question, but I can give some examples.
Mm.
Today in the Raqqa, the Kurds are trying to kick out the Arabs. When before, during the war, we were all with the Kurds trying to get to their liberation and bring identities. How do we deal with multiple identities? It's about time we talk about it.
Mm.
That's something that's in the root cause of a lot of things.
Mm.
Where's the us? Where's the them? Let's talk about it and see how do we perpetrate this cycle. I keep going to Lana's work with the Shift Foundation are doing an amazing work on healing histories. I
Mm.
recommend it as a work of interest around how, and she has people coming from a lot of places, so it's there that we can meet and talk, for instance, and things like that. The happy startup, when we meet, we can talk. There's no need to. I think that it's very difficult when we put somebody in a corner and we tell them, you know, you did that, etc. Now change your mind and love me and free me from your oppression. It's very difficult.
Mm.
It's very difficult. However, if somebody is putting you in the corner, by all means get it out of your chest. And that's what I would do it peacefully as much as I can. I have never been in a place where, I have been once and somebody put a gun on me. He wanted to steal. And okay, I was rescued. I managed to get him off my back, but that's my encounter with a gun, and I don't like guns and so on. However, if somebody takes it to defend themselves and get people out of their chest, let's look at who's Goliath and who's David, even when the question is like historically from other sides. You guys, we don't have sides. I believe in multiple lifetimes. I believe in, let's leave this idea a little bit further down the road. Let's talk science. It's easier for people to grasp it. We have genealogy. We get our genes from people. If we look back 1,000 years ago, all of our ancestors were killing each other harshly, and a lot of drama involved. And we have maybe been rescuers, and we have been oppressors, and we have been oppressed. So even without going into second lives and third lives and whatever happens after death and stuff like that, that could be not in the perspective of a lot of people right now. So let's just find where we meet, as we said, and let's keep the conversation going. When we don't have any more conversation, hatred takes its place. Nature doesn't love gaps. When there's a gap of talking about the issues, hatred filled its place, and it starts with the word, and it starts with saying, this guy can be killed because he wrote something that actually challenged our God, our sacredness.
Mm.
This is where the fight for justice is, also to challenge the sacred, make it challengeable and mundane, and challenge the mundane and make it sacred. A person dying on a beach because they have no place to go is not a mundane thing, it's a sacred thing. And we don't need to do anything about it. We can just spark with it. And then we can work differently with people when we meet them.
Mm.
Start from a different place, and more justice will come as a result.
Thank you. I think that's a really wonderful summation of what we've been talking about. If people would like to get in touch with you, continue this conversation, or if you have anything particular that you'd like to mention that you're working on at the moment. Is there anything you'd particularly like to share? We have a link to your link tree, so
Linktree
people.
has it. So there's Tripoli, I talked about it. There's Ala, I talked about him. And I would support, I mean, I would mention one more, which is something I'm working with. I mean, I worked with before, and now I'm coming back to help. Is Global Dream Web. We do a inner work with adolescents and young women. We've done it so far. We didn't want to grow very fast, so we've done it on a small scale with 2 groups because the depth was more important. And that's where we are. We are now in a place of fundraising. We have stopped, but like if there's more fund that could come, would be great because we're downgrading a lot of things, and that's it.
Thank you. And I think I'd like to, extend anyone who's feels affected by the stuff that we've been talking about, is to sit with this and see what you can do, but in a way that meets your needs too. I think this idea of us, it's easy to want to, for me particularly, to try and feel like I need to step into the savior in this, but instead to look for the opportunity about where is this part of my lived experience, where is
Oh,
this
okay.
harm part of my suffering too, and to look at the ways that we can engage with this stuff together. Because I think for me it's that division that causes so much of the harm. When we seek justice by creating division, we seem to be working against our own interests and everyone else's, and allowing ourselves to go in the opposite direction, to connect with and experience and engage with, feels like a more helpful way of going about it. But that's just like you said, that's a very hard thing to do in a practice. But
It's
giving
it
ourselves.
can be very easy to stand in solidarity. I forgot one project, sorry, I need to insert it. It's
Yeah.
Hakura. They are today in the land. They are a group of Palestinian people who are opening up to more Syrian, etc. I'm helping them. So the idea is to create a bank seat for sustainable, like food liberation. We want to call it as simple as that, food liberation. And they are doing beautiful work, turning it into permaculture, working with the locals. They're a very creative team, and I think they're on a good go. So if you can participate with their fundraising, it's down there. I know that it's a lot of fundraisers, but it's not the most important. I think the most important is opening the heart and seeing whatever sometimes around us a lot of people have needs.
I think for me with the fundraising, very often it's that's one part of it, and it's
Yeah.
what can I contribute to the project if I
You can
have,
contribute by becoming in the group, in the community, giving opinions about what they're producing, giving them a new technology tool for their e-shop, helping stuff like that, whatever.
yeah, exactly. And I think seeking those ways of contributing that bring you joy.
Yeah, absolutely, Matthew. I totally agree on the way you put it.
So yeah, thank you so much for this conversation. I think it's such a very timely and really personal and yet global, um, globally important conversation. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me. I
You're
enjoyed
very
it.
very welcome. I really do hope this show got you thinking. It certainly has me. So do reach out and ask either of us, and continue this conversation if there's anything you'd like to share or discuss. Thank you very much for watching in the audience. It is your support that makes this possible, or at least legitimizes my excuse to talk to really interesting, wonderful people doing amazing stuff. So please do share it with anyone you think would find it helpful and thought-provoking. Upcoming and past episodes are available on YouTube and LinkedIn, and are also available on on your favorite podcast app. So if you search for Delightful Dissent, you should be able to find that. At time of recording, we are still behind on those, though I am ever closer to finally resolving that particular issue. The next episode, I'm going to be talking to Jeanette Dupre, who is facilitator, coach, and change designer. And we're going to be talking about the idea that engagement creates alignment. And I think
Nice.
this is very interestingly related. That so many of these engagement and change efforts feel hollow and don't really result in anything of value. And when I think about this, I think it both in terms of organizationally and kind of nationally and even internationally. And it feels so closely related to what we've been talking about today. And I'm hoping that we're going to be able to explore what it really means to bring about change that works for everyone. So that's going to be at 1 p.m. UK time on Tuesday, the 30th of August. I hope to see you then. In the meantime, please do go out there and make some delightful dissent of your own. Thanks very much and goodbye.